Hi, I'm Noah Gervais. In this video we're going to be looking at Depression Quest. We're going to be coming at the game three ways: objectively, subjectively, and via a cultural criticism of Gamergate, the hashtag that sprung up in response to the game. Hold on to your butts, folks. Here we go with Depression Quest.
First, let's discuss Depression Quest from an objective perspective. It's a text adventure where you play a young man in his 20s coping with depression while trying to maintain a job and his relationships with a girlfriend, his family, and his friends. Winning or losing isn't specifically defined, but combating the depression is dependent on your willingness to reach out to others for help. If you are more depressed, options for how to respond to your situations are reduced and blocked off. If you are successfully battling your depression, you have the mental wherewithal to make healthier decisions. The game is 103 megabytes, takes between 1 to 3 hours to play, and it is also free. Thank you for listening to this objective review of Depression Quest. Now, in determining if this unassuming game is worth 103 megabytes of your space and 0 of your dollars, that actually is enough information. For most gamers, I think it's a text adventure about real life and depression, and it's free, are all that they really need to know to make an informed consumer decision. That's as far as objectivity will get us in discussing Depression Quest. It's subjectivity, looking at Depression Quest as an artistic work and not a consumer product, through which Depression Quest comes alive and the conversation actually gets interesting. The stated intention for the game is twofold: to help demonstrate the reductive experience of living with depression to those not familiar, and to show those who do live with a depression that they are not alone. That's it. The sole focus of the game is this compassionate thesis, and the game never goes beyond or fails to deliver on this simple, unusual intention. You begin in the middle of a bad funk. You have a girlfriend, Alex, and an okay but uninspiring job. The game's first conflict is when, after coming home from a shit day at work, you try to sit down and work on a personal project. The option to sit down, grab a drink, and just do it are blocked off from you. Your options are to fall into varying degrees of escapism, or try to ham-fistedly force yourself to work. The escapism, if you choose it, takes over and nothing is accomplished, and forcing yourself to work yields equally disappointing results. In Depression Quest, as in actual depression, there are seldom true good choices. You have to choose what kind of half-measure you actually have the mental stamina to manage, and a lot of times, it ain't much. As you're first getting your handle on your character, this seems a little forced, but as the options lists grow and shrink over time, depending on the choices you make, it starts to become a really meaningful mechanic, and a true one, using the format of games to tell a truth about depression that it is incredibly difficult to explain. If you continue to flail for comforting things, your depression begins to spiral out of control, and soon enough you find yourself struggling to function on a pretty basic level. Now, there's an argument that this is an oversimplification, and in a way it is a bit of one. But if you're trying to fit the experience of depression into a work that takes an hour or so to get through, some simplification is going to have to happen. Everyone's experience of depression is different. But I'll tell you a little bit about mine. This game ran true for me, over and over again, in ways that hit me pretty deeply. People ask me semi-frequently, why are you a pizza cook and not a real game critic? And the answer I never really wanted to talk about is, every time I've tried to finish school, depression fucks me up. Is it an oversimplification that acting selfishly and shamefully, avoiding your problems and expecting others to pick up your emotional slack causes depression to deepen and spiral? Yes. It's also what factually happened to me, what I allowed to happen, over and over in my own life. It is simplified in the game so that it's more universally meaningful. If the main character was any more defined, the player couldn't paint in the details of their own experiences. Any less defined, and the player would have no footing or focus in the narrative. It's a fine balance, and one the game walks quite well. I wish that I could explain depression to my father the way the game explained depression to me. A while ago I asked him, why, considering what a complete fucked up mess I was in high school, did you keep giving me all those pamphlets and book and magazine articles about getting into the top 10 colleges in America? And he said, I just thought that you cared about knowledge and about learning, and that would be enough. And for plenty of people it is enough. People pull themselves up from dire circumstances every day, more dire than I will ever face, that's for damn sure. But that's the thing about depression and how people without interpret people with. There is not a compelling reason why the depressed person isn't just bootstrapping their way through the sadness. Don't they know what they're supposed to do to get ahead, not to mention get by in life? What Depression Quest illustrates, with increasing resonance and meaning as the game goes on, is that depressed people do, in fact, know the correct response, but choosing that response is impossible in light of the weight of the experience of deep depression. It's a really complicated dynamic in real life, and Depression Quest uses the language of games, the familiar formats of choice and response, to illustrate it in a way that's hard to do conversationally. It really is a fantastic accomplishment in gaming, and when people say, why did this deserve to be on Steam, this is fundamentally where the competency lies, in this use of a game format to communicate the experience of deep depression in a novel but heartfelt way. It is the language of escapism repurposed to accomplish the opposite. So, how does the game define getting better? For the most part, it's straightforwardly. Choosing options that help you see outside yourself and broaden your connections to others lets you make progress with your depression. Hiding it and trying to mitigate its symptoms does not. Again, this was incredibly resonant for me. I've had therapists for most of my life, but it took me a while to find a good one and understand the value of therapy. A good therapist doesn't try to fix you. A good therapist gives you new perspectives that depression prevents you from seeing. In the middle of a funk, or even just normally, depression colors the way that a person looks at things on a fundamental level. A therapist can show you a whole new perspective you never would have arrived at on your own, and in seeing your life laid out a little differently before you, you can begin to fix it yourself. The game gives you the option of taking medication, but does not make this a condition for getting better. It only takes diligence in remaining connected and present that determines if your depression abates. It's easiest to see this in how the game handles your girlfriend, Alex. Alex is there for you throughout most of the game, but if you make no move to seek help, or try to, but only make a half-hearted effort with it, she will eventually break up with you. It's unfair to ask her to shoulder your entire emotional burden if you will not. Alex cannot be the sole thing that brings you peace. When I was reading the breakup scene, I couldn't believe how close it was to actual lived moments from my life, where I've ruined and nearly ruined entire relationships by indulging my sadness and resentment for weeks on end. Moments where the person you love, the person you need but fundamentally need too much, says, I love you, but you're so far away. Fundamentally, this was the most amazing thing about the game for me. I had always thought that these were moments of private, personal failure. I figured I was the only one who was struggling and striving and coming up short in the ways that Depression Quest portrays, in so many finely detailed variations. As someone who's struggled with depression my whole life, as someone who's allowed it to stunt the growth of their life, I have lived this game. But it doesn't have to be that way, in the game or in real life. If you play through the game trying to heal instead of trying to run from the depression, if you make the effort, Alex will ask to move in. One of the hardest lessons of my life was learning that you have to be lovable to be loved. That it isn't enough to just be. If you're going to stay meaningfully connected to someone, you've got to be the kind of person that person would want to be around. Again, a simple lesson, but god fucking damn it if I didn't spend years of my life playing the fool before I figured it out. If putting a thing like this in a game like Depression Quest can get just one person to stop and think, just how responsible am I making other people for my emotional well-being, this game will have done an invaluable service. And that's a lesson that transcends gender, orientation, or anything else. That's a lesson for all humans with depression. Depression Quest is like that throughout. It is deeply personal and designed to elicit a deeply personal response in the player, but the intent is universal. Why then is this game being continually portrayed as a feminist work? Here's where the way people reacted to the game diverges wildly from the game itself. Depression Quest was created by an indie developer in her late 20s named Zoe Quinn. Within a few weeks of the game's release, Quinn's ex-boyfriend, Aaron Jeanji, released a 10,000-word blog post accusing Quinn of extreme personal and professional misconduct. People were enraged by the manifesto and immediately demanded that Quinn be held accountable for all the charges listed in the post. When their threads, which were filled with some really vile hate speech, were deleted and editors were as slow to take an aggrieved ex's self-indulgent slam piece as legitimate whistleblowing, Quinn's detractors, who organized under the hashtag Gamergate, and yes, they are completely serious in comparing Quinn's alleged misconduct to presidential fraud, cried conspiracy. The corrupt gaming journalists, who were supposedly being directed by Quinn herself as if she was some kind of all-powerful unseen hand of sex and lies, were obviously censoring the whole debacle to cover their guilty asses. Right? This isn't about harassing Quinn, although she was driven from her home by death and rape threats. It's about journalistic accountability. Right? Let's slow down a moment. At their absolute best, and I mean best because their worst has no bottom floor, the Gamergate folk want to talk about both Yeonji's and Quinn's side of the issue. Teach the controversy. Except that Yeonji's side never actually panned out. Yes, moderators shut down threads when Gamergate was starting to get rolling. If I was a moderator or editor and this shitstorm showed up on my doorstep, Yeonji's post would in no way make me think the incredible amounts of pure memified hatred poured Quinn's way was coming from a legitimate source. Principally, Yanji's screed is creepily, unnecessarily autobiographical for whistleblowing, and by that I mean he writes passages like this, quote, "How this works is I've had two possible pictures in my head for the past month. One that looks like some ransom note collage of letters scotch-taped over a cum-covered canvas spelling out, Zoe Quinn is the best person, best possible person, you're a bad person if you think Zoe is not the best person. And another, in the form of a precision-carved jigsaw puzzle, for which all of the pieces I wasn't missing fit perfectly into what seemed to be a subtly worded message to the effect of, LOL, you're an idiot, she's a jerk, flip me over for a list of dates and names of people she's cheated on you with. How this works is I've been telling myself, nah, that can't be what the jigsaw puzzle means. Look, this cum collage Zoe gave me says so." End quote. If you're familiar with my channel, you might think it's the pot calling the kettle black of me to say that this guy is a self-indulgent windbag, but for God's sake, he starts his tirade off with the title, Act 0, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Were people really surprised that an editor's first reaction to this is, I don't think this is news? Here's the thing, the matter was looked into. No review about Depression Quest was ever written by anyone she was sleeping with. None of the allegations of professional misconduct stuck. When the furor only increased when Quinn was exonerated of the charges, mainstream outlets like Time, The New Yorker, The Guardian, and The Washington Post began to cover the issue. They covered it from the angle of being troubled and confused by the ferocity with which people were clinging to the idea that harassing Quinn was a viable path to greater integrity in games journalism. The thing is, mainstream outlets like The New Yorker are held to an incredibly high standard of ethics. You can cry foul on Kotaku all you like, but The New Yorker has literally no stake in lying on anyone's behalf in this issue. From a moderate perspective, this all went down in a relatively ethical way from the editor's point of view. A news story comes in that does not appear to be legitimate news. After a couple of days, people demand that it be looked into, so you look into it. When no evidence of wrongdoing is found, you publish no articles demanding Quinn be held accountable for things that you have already determined she's not accountable for. Is that censorship, or consensus that no crime having been committed, Quinn is entitled to protection from libel? That's what gets me most about this pretense of Gamergate being concerned about journalistic ethics. Its supporters assume that Yanji told no lies, that his document is 100% truthful, and that the burden of proof to the contrary is on Quinn. Not one word about how a slowness to acknowledge the charges against Quinn was ethically sound in protecting her from spurious accusations. And speaking of spurious accusation, I don't think Quinn needs libel protection because she's a woman. I think Quinn needs libel protection because if an ex of mine ever published something like that about me, I would want level heads to prevail. I would want the matter handled in a professional manner. Quinn deserves what all people subjected to the limelight want, a guarantee that trustworthy sources won't condemn you on hearsay. As someone who's just getting started in a freelance writing career, I would be terrified if I wasn't offered those protections myself, and let's be real. If this was a Joey Quinn, and not a Zoe Quinn, who would the burden of proof be on? Would it still be on Quinn, or Quinn's Psycho X? Games journalists did dig themselves quite a hole with the Gamergate mess, though, and they did it in a way that they could have avoided really easily. Part of what made Gamergate folks cry conspiracy was an almost simultaneous outpouring of editorials with the same thesis. Gamers are dead. Now, already the Gamergate people were spinning a narrative of editorial misconduct and collusion at the highest levels, that games journalists were somehow fundamentally hostile towards games and gamers, hostile or economically predatory, and the editorial response played into that perfectly. I don't think anyone considered it, but all of these Gamers Are Dead articles poured just gallons of gasoline onto the fire by coming off as condescending and hostile to gamers who had no knowledge of the issue. It's easy to see why the editors did it in the first place. To a piece, the thesis of the Gamers Are Dead articles is that Gamergate people insist on portraying themselves as the true face of gamers, so the writers don't want to have anything to do with it, and gamers as a group have grown wildly beyond that definition anyway. That's a simple point. That's the wrong point. Instead of finger-wagging, this was a moment where how people define themselves as a gamer could have been celebrated. They could have demonstrated how Quinn is not an outsider, but someone who's a lifelong gamer and passionate about games. They could have killed Gamergate with kindness to the great majority of gamers who did not engage in harassment against Quinn. Instead, editors could not pass up the opportunity to try and engage Gamergate directly, call them out. Unfortunately, they poked gamers with a very sharp stick in a very delicate place when they did it, the construction of their identity as a gamer. So, I'm a misogynist because I didn't like Depression Quest, eh? Well, fuck you. Now I'm #Gamergate. or some variation thereof, kept popping up over and over again in comments on these articles. A little high-horsing against the folks who actually persecuted Quinn is pretty called for, but this felt like full-blast bullshit to people impartial and uninformed on the issue. There's a simple litmus test for determining if you're a misogynist. Did you hate Depression Quest, and did you not care for the Gamers Are Dead articles? You are not a misogynist. Did you do either or both of the previous two things, and then go on to call someone a worthless slut? If no, then no. If yes, then, to make this a Foxworthyism, you might be a misogynist. The issue at stake isn't if gamers are misogynist or not. The articles are pretty right about it. This issue is more about identity politics than it is about misogyny, and certainly more about identity politics than it is about Depression Quest. It all really depends on how you construct your identity as a gamer. In the New Yorker article about Depression Quest's creator, Quinn, she mentions her fondness for the old PC platformer Commander Keen and how the game came to her at a difficult time in her life. Commander Keen's a game that's close to my heart too, and it's a major part of what got me into games in the first place. When I was about 8 or 9, I went to court for the part of my parents' divorce proceedings where custody is determined, and I was in the kids' waiting area for like 7 whole hours. They had a couple of old DOS machines, and I asked the woman there, and she said there weren't any games on it, but when I went rooting in the directory, I found Commander Keen. While my parents were busy lying to the state of California about who committed the worst trespasses as a spouse and as parent, and the state determined who was the fitter among the two, I did not actually have to fucking be there. I got to be in this hilarious, brightly colored world of wacky robots and Bill Watterson-esque childhood fantasy, a game that was created, believe it or not, by the same folks who would go on to invent first-person shooters with Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Escapism is considered more of a sin than a virtue by most people, but there are moments in your life where being yourself, who you are and where you are in that moment of your life, is completely intolerable, and you would give anything to be someone different, with different needs, different wants, different everything, and games do that. Games do that better than any other form of visual media, and they do it quite often as well as books, though with a different kind of escapist construction. That day at the courthouse, I would have given anything to be anywhere else, but I didn't have to give anything. I just had to execute a run command. Commander Keen was my first moment where I felt like games meant something to who I am as a person. But it wasn't my last moment like that, not by a long shot. Most people, when you ask them if they're a gamer, will talk about moments like these, moments where gaming took on a greater meaning than lights on a screen. For most gamers, this autobiographical construction of their gamer identity is enough. That the escapism was meaningful to them is enough. But there's another way of constructing your identity as a gamer that is a lot less universal. And to talk about that, I'm going to go all the way back to a song Merle Haggard sang in 1977.
If some might call me a good time fella, I ain't black and I ain't a yellow, just a white boy looking for a place to do my thing. If I don't want no handout living and don't want a part of anything they're giving, I'm proud and white and I got a song to sing.
Now that is some good old-fashioned casual racism. This song, from Haggard's critically acclaimed album A Workin' Man Can't Get Nowhere Today, is part of a pretty substantial movement in classic country music that I'm going to refer to as white pride. White pride isn't hardcore racism, it's not the KKK, it's just the casual but pervasive idea that being poor and white was somehow better than being anything else and poor, that whiteness meant something good about you, that even if you didn't have anything else, if you were white, you were still a worthwhile person. This is extremely racist still, but it's not racist in a directly hateful way. The racist assumptions work in the direction that if the white folk really do make better neighbors and have more respect for country and community, then blacks and other non-whites do not have these neighborly attributes, nor do they value them. In the absence of actually having power in the world, white pride believers define themselves as being good people in comparison to others and construct their self-image through opposition. This is something country music has had to seriously address for decades, and in looking at it, there's a strong parallel to gaming, with sexism as the central issue instead of racism. Again, I'm not saying that Gamergate is like the KKK, but I am saying Gamergate is like your granddad when he says, I don't actually hate black people, but, and then whatever comes after the but. The rhetoric, the language used, and the construction of the heroes and villains in the narrative, whether white pride or Gamergate, is essentially the same. White pride says, I have no problem with good Christian black folks. I just don't want all these young black criminals moving into my neighborhood. Gamergate says, I have no problem with women who just want to play games. I just hate these feminist social justice warriors who want to destroy gaming. White pride says, being proud of being white is being proud of who I am, and damned if I'll let you ivory tower liberals take that from me. Gamergate says, being proud of gaming is being proud of who I am, and damned if I'm going to let you ivory tower bloggers take that away from me. White pride says, this isn't about hating black people, this is about caring for your community. Gamergate says, this isn't about hating women, this is about caring about journalistic integrity. Sure, the Gamergate supporter can feel like that's how it is, like it really is about those issues. But they're defining themselves as a gamer through opposition to what they see as outsider influence. It is critical to the narrative of Gamergate that Quinn be portrayed as this evil, conspiratorial outsider power instead of a human being and another member of the same community. Otherwise, Gamergate folks don't get to be the hero. White pride caught on so hard in country music because country music provides a mythology for the powerless. Its music is about people trying to make as good a living as they can in a world that's passing them by. The escapism of country music made it a beacon to the stepped-on and powerless. It's how they helped construct their own nobility and poverty. Now, you can be poor and proud and take pride in the thrift and the cunning and the family and construct your poorness in an autobiographical way that way. Or you could be poor and proud, but make that pride centered around your being white, constructing your poorness by favorably comparing yourself to other groups. Games provide escapism to the poor and powerless, myself included, Quinn included, just the same as country music, and arguably much more strongly. So it's only natural that this dynamic should come up. It's true that the whole fiasco blew up because gaming is becoming more mainstream, but the cause of the blow-up is not really very specific to gaming in any kind of way. What we're seeing with Gamergate is, at long last, a much broader cultural dialectic coming home to roost in gaming's rafters, making itself at home, settling in for the long haul. When will we stop talking about Gamergate, you ask? I ask. I think we're all pretty tired of it at this point. Unfortunately, while Quinn might be able to return to the background in a few weeks, this debate will probably never truly go away. It's a shadow of a larger thing, a thing that's much more commonly associated with older generations and more traditional things. Is there a war by feminists against the gaming community? That's the same question, the same argumentative style that Fox News asks when they say, is there a war by atheists against Christmas? Should we give equal measure to the voices claiming Quinn should be held accountable for crimes of which she has already been exonerated as the voices defending her? Well, should we give equal measure to the folks claiming God created the world 4,000 years ago as the folks who claim to have all this scientific evidence to the contrary? If you're a member of the international gaming community and this is your first time getting sucked into the American style of identity politics, welcome. It gets no better from here. For country music, as time has gone on, the white pride movement has faded considerably, and the genre transcended this essential conflict. Even though white pride is an embarrassing legacy, country music never let itself be defined by these voices. Never once have I told someone that I love classic country music and have them say to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was under the impression that you didn't hate black people." You are not a racist if you listen to country music. You're not a sexist if you play games. But it is racist to deny that country music struggles with issues of race, just like it is sexist to shout down voices that say games have a problem with portrayal of women. The genre does not have to be defined by these struggles. You don't have to define yourself as a gamer by these struggles. But these struggles exist. What's perhaps saddest to me is that Depression Quest has a lot of valuable things to say to the gaming community, universal things that have nothing to do with any of the things brought up in the wake of the game's release, and if more gamers simply welcomed the contributions of indie developers like Quinn, instead of puffing up their self-image through opposition to them, this conversation might not have ever even happened. There's no limit to the voices in gaming. Not for what Gamergate folks would consider the traditional values of gaming, not for the envelope pushers in the indie scene like Quinn. So when I see comments insisting that it is okay to demonize Quinn because Depression Quest isn't even a game anyway, I don't see it as a problem with gaming culture. I see it as a 21st century remix of old Merle when he says,
I don't want no handout living and don't want a part of anything they're giving. I'm proud and white and I got a song to sing. Well, I've said a few things and I'll admit it. If you want to get ahead, you gotta hump and get it. I'm a white boy looking for a place to do my thing. I'm a white boy looking for a place to do my thing.
you have to choose what kind of half measure you actually have the mental stamina to manage, and a lot of times, it ain't much. As you're first getting your handle on your character, this seems a little forced, but as the options lists grow and shrink over time, depending on the choices you make, it starts to become a really meaningful mechanic, and a true one, using the format of games to tell a truth about depression that it is incredibly difficult to explain. If you continue to flail for comforting things, your depression begins to spiral out of control, and soon enough you find yourself struggling to function on a pretty basic level. Now, there's an argument that this is an oversimplification, and in a way it is a bit of one. But if you're trying to fit the experience of depression into a work that takes an hour or so to get through,
If you can, I'm feeling down, and I do appreciate you being around. Won't you help me get my feet back on the ground? Won't you please, please help me, help me, help me?
Hi, I'm Noah Gervais. In this video we're going to be looking at Depression Quest. We're going to be coming at the game three ways: objectively, subjectively, and via a cultural criticism of...
that's it. The sole focus of the game is this compassionate thesis, and the game never goes beyond or fails to deliver on this simple, unusual intention. You begin in the middle of a bad funk. You have a girlfriend, Alex, and an okay but uninspiring job. The game's first conflict is when, after coming home from a shit day at work, you try to sit down and work on a personal project. The option to sit down, grab a drink, and just do it are blocked off from you. Your options are to fall into varying degrees of escapism, or try to ham-fistedly force yourself to work. The escapism, if you choose it, takes over and nothing is accomplished, and forcing yourself to work yields equally disappointing results. In Depression Quest, as in actual depression, there are seldom true good choices.
Gamergate, the hashtag that sprung up in response to the game. Hold on to your butts, folks. Here we go with Depression Quest.
First, let's discuss Depression Quest from an objective perspective. It's a text adventure where you play a young man in his 20s coping with depression while trying to maintain a job and his relationships with a girlfriend, his family, and his friends. Winning or losing isn't specifically defined, but combating the depression is dependent on your willingness to reach out to others for help. If you are more depressed, options for how to respond to your situations are reduced and blocked off. If you are successfully battling your depression, you have the mental wherewithal to make healthier decisions. The game is 103 megabytes, takes between 1 to 3 hours to play, and it is also free. Thank you for listening to this objective review of Depression Quest. Now, in determining if this unassuming game is worth 103 megabytes of your space and $0 of your dollars, that actually is enough information. For most gamers, I think it's a text adventure about real life and depression, and it's free, are all that they really need to know to make an informed consumer decision. That's as far as objectivity will get us in discussing Depression Quest. It's subjectivity, looking at Depression Quest as an artistic work and not a consumer product, through which Depression Quest comes alive and the conversation actually gets interesting. The stated intention for the game is twofold: to help demonstrate the reductive experience of living with depression to those not familiar, and to show those who do live with depression that they are not alone.